All right, well, we're going to get started with the presentation today of EX trends in the Office 365 digital workplace ecosystem. Kind of a mouthful for a webinar, but as we go into the topic today, I think the genesis of this is really to provide some of the insight that we're seeing in the market around employee experience trends built around both the digital workplace, but specifically Office 365, the things that people are doing to make it easier for end users to get their jobs done and to benefit from all of the great things that Office 365 provides, like better productivity, better teamwork, better community. My name is Brian Edwards. I've been a digital workplace consultant for over 20 years. I just hit my 20-year anniversary, and I'm the director of products and services here at Habanero. At Habanero, we are really about making life better for people in the workplace, making their day jobs better, making them love the work that they're doing. We believe there's a huge opportunity to create more work environments where people both can bring themselves and also help with the purpose of the organization in a much more fantastic way. So this idea of bringing life to work is really important to us. We've been recognized in the market by some great awards. The Nielsen Norman Group, an award that looks at some of the top intranets and awards the top 10 every year, as well as Step 2 Intranet Awards. But we've also been recognized as an employee experience leader. And obviously in the topic of today's webinar, this is sort of an important recognition. So ALM Intelligence saw Habanero and featured us as a challenger in their inaugural EX Consultants report. And Gartner has noted Habanero as a representative vendor for the last 2 years in their digital services guide for employee experience. So maybe we'll just start with what is employee experience? It's a rather new term that's being thrown around quite a lot these days. And we hear like this definition. It's one that kind of sums up I guess the kind of concept behind employee experience. This is from a book called The Employee Experience: How to Attract Talent, Retain Top Performers, and Drive Results. And they say that the employee experience is the sum of perceptions employees have about their interactions with the organization in which they work. So if you apply that to the digital workplace, you know, it's not just the tools that people interact with, but it's all of the numerous interactions that they have with those tools. And those interactions can be quite complex in a digital workplace. So we like to think of the sort of environment that these experiences are happening as sort of an interaction of a bunch of actors and systems. And those systems are made up of places. So in the case of a collaboration environment, maybe it's a conference room where someone has to walk in and get themselves set up to present, or maybe share with coworkers that might be in distance locations. It's made up of the tools. So that's sort of the devices and the software and the data and the information that they're using in that environment. It's made up of the processes. So that's the sort of tasks and the order and the sequencing of how things work within the organization. And then finally, there's this obviously most important part there, the people layer. And so this is this sort of all the interactions of the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, the cultural tendencies, the value systems that sits inside the organization. And the sum of all these pieces really make up a employee experience. Another way to think about this idea of an experience is thinking about an employee journey. Now, this chart, this timeline, it could be the time from the day the employee joins the organization to perhaps when they get their next job or their second career within the same organization. It could also be literally an entire just day or an experience using a tool. And inside of those experiences, employees have these key interaction points that could be very positive or very negative. In fact, in employee experience circles, we call these moments that matter. And moments that matter are these key intersections or these key moments where an employee may have a really high experience or they have the likelihood of a really low experience. And these are the ones, as we're crafting new experiences, that we want to focus on to make that journey better for employees. So in this realm of the employee experience, what are some of the common questions we're seeing around Office 365? We'll start there and just kind of talk through what some of our customers are asking us when it comes to enterprise experiences. So the first one is, Office 365 seems pretty intuitive. Like it's way better than anything we had. Some people say SharePoint's no longer something you hate right out of the box. Do we really need to do anything different if people are simply accessing Office 365? So it's a great question. Like, can you just provide a platform and the tools and know that end users are going to figure it out? We'll get into answering that question through this webinar. Another question, there's too many places for our employees to get information. How can I make it easier for them to find what they need? So another common pattern or issue inside of the ecosystem of the digital workplace is just, these too many tools, too many places. I think that just gets worse with Office 365, which has a lot of options, and those options make it even more confusing for end users to figure out where something is. Another question we hear is, we have hubs for our intranet and ServiceNow and Workday. So we have all these different environments that employees are told they need to go and get some information. How should these be connecting? Like, should we be connecting them? Do we really need all three of these environments? Can we pick one of them? We're seeing an increase in this question here. So people are using Microsoft Teams as the place to get work done. What does this mean for our intranet? So if you've been following Microsoft, obviously Microsoft Teams is a really, really important tool for Microsoft, and they're focusing a lot of attention on making that a much better tool and a place to collaborate. They're also claiming that it's the place that employees will go and get work done. So, I think this represents kind of a threat to some of our traditional locations and places that we used to send employees, things like your corporate intranet or Yammer. So certainly this question speaks to how should those tools be fitting together? And then lastly, another question we hear is really around how and where should we be building community? Like, should that be on our intranet? Or, there's these enterprise social network tools like Yammer or Workplace by Facebook. Are those better to build community? What should that look like? So this presentation will try to achieve starting to answer those questions and give you some of the patterns and practices we're seeing in the market that people are doing to make it easier for end users inside of all of these questions. All of these questions to me really sit in this environment where, just to repeat, what some of the questions really are getting at, a kind of a complex ecosystem. So you have Office 365, you sign in there, and that's probably where I'm going to get my documents and my information. I may have OneDrive where I'm storing personal files. If I'm a large enough enterprise, I probably have a corporate intranet. And so that might be where I see corporate news and announcements. Maybe it's a place where corporate regulatory content goes, like policies and procedures. And so it's another place to get information. Certainly, Microsoft is promoting this idea of using Teams as a foundation for collaboration. And then I might have these other enterprise systems such as ServiceNow. In a complex environment, it's even worse. You might have tools like Yammer, where the conversations going on, Dynamics, where I might need information about my customers, Workday, which is another enterprise line of business system, which is tracking employee information. And you get the problem here. There's a lot of different systems that end users have to access. And so the big question around all this is like, how should they connect? How do we pull these things together? What are the patterns that are emerging inside of the workplace to make this easier for end users? So let's talk about those patterns, making it easier to experience trends that bridge this experience for users. One of the first ones I just like to point out is this idea of authentication. So you have all of these business systems, and all of the business systems need the user to be authenticated and get access. And so one of the common patterns we see is using a standard account to authenticate users across all of these different systems. Something like Azure Active Directory can be a sort of center pin for connecting all of these line of business systems, so users don't need to have multiple usernames and passwords. This may seem kind of obvious, but one way to streamline that for end users is making sure that the sign-in experience is consistent across all of these systems. So if you're in Office 365, you might be familiar with this screen where I can pick an account. Even this screen sometimes can be a little daunting for end users if they have to pick multiple accounts, because those would all show up here. So making it easy for them to figure out which account they need. And then in the world of Microsoft, you have an opportunity to take people away to an organization sign-in page. And one of the things we like to tell our customers is to personalize this page. It helps to have all of your users land on something that's familiar, that represents the brand, and it's one way to be able to connect all of the experiences with these systems. One side benefit we're noticing is that we could also tell our end users, if you do get a link in an email and you click on it and you don't go to a page that looks like it's our company branding, that could be a warning sign that someone's trying to phish for your username or password. And so it helps give them second thought as to whether or not they should put their username and password into the system. So I'm just starting with this one because, authentication is a place where you can probably not knock it out of the ballpark, but you can certainly get it wrong and frustrate users. There's nothing worse than having a system where it's either too hard to remember my passwords or know how to change it if I forget it, or if I have to keep entering a different password for every system. That could be super frustrating for end users, and certainly a place to try and make it easier for people to have a great experience. Another way we're seeing organizations make it easier for end users is through targeting and personalization. And there's lots of options here, so I'll just point out a few. First, if you're in this Office 365 environment, so this is Habanero's intranet that you're looking at here, you'll notice at the top I have the Office 365 bar that says SharePoint up there. And on the left-hand side, I have the waffle. So one way you can make it easier for end users is by making sure that you're targeting the applications that are specific and relevant for them. You can use Active Directory to help target applications to individual groups of users. So for example, when I click on this menu, I see here that Habanero has a series of apps that have been targeted just to me. So we have our intranet, we call it H, our CRM system, Social Time, and a few other tools that are very specific to Habanero. This kind of admin targeting of links and applications also continues into the Microsoft Teams environment. So you'll notice there's this set of dots that also represent apps that end users can have. You can control the enterprise app store for end users within your organization here too. This is a pretty wildly changing environment. Over the next few months, we'll probably see more features. Microsoft has said that it is going to start to allow organizations to put icons or features inside the bar there on the left, though that's not available yet. We should see changes to this to make it more and more easy to target users to the content and the information in the systems that then they need for their jobs. One common method we see for targeting is really built into your corporate intranet. So what we're looking at here is an intranet for a very large organization called PHSA, or the Provincial Health Services Authority. Now, this organization is made up of a lot of agencies and other groups, and each of those agencies and groups has a very specific set of information and data and content that's specific to them. So having an intranet that is targeted and provides personalized information is really one really important way to make sure users have a great experience. In fact, in almost all of our intranet projects, when we do research on old intranets, one of the most common things we hear is that people don't read the news at all because they don't feel it's relevant to them. So it's a very important facet or factor in people actually consuming the information on your intranet. So in the case of PHSA, their intranet is named Pod, and so they have a personalization engine. So this is what I would see if I was going to go set the profile or my preferences for where I want to see news for. And you'll notice on the page, as I look down the page, it says Our News, and it shows this across PHSA. That across PHSA would be an example of if I were viewing it just for my agency, I'd see the news filtered just by that agency. As I head on down the page, though, those profile settings are really powerful, those personalization settings, in that it also drives the kind of content that I see on the page, such as here, where we see my workplace, when we have an image actually of the building that I'm working in and specific content that's related to that building sitting inside that box. So we see customers using a mix of personalization as well as targeting to get these kinds of things right in Office 365. Again, just using some of the out-of-the-box features in Office 365, Active Directory targeting and Active Directory groups in order to push content out to people. So this is a good way to make sure end users have a great experience in finding content in their organization. One of the things I thought I just mentioned before I exit this, we do tend to see a kind of a promotion of helping end users know that they have to set their preferences. So perhaps the first time they sign in, which is really common, we'll put up a screen like this, which just reminds people how to set their preferences, lets them say they can do it later, and then we'll prompt them again later if they don't have time to set their preferences. So it's a great way to make sure that users have some control over this. Another common pattern or practice we're seeing in this Office 365 digital workplace ecosystem is really integrating the social experiences. So instead of having a lot of different places where there is a social conversation, we're seeing customers spend time thinking about the use case for social and really integrating those experiences. So for example, we have here a communications portal for WestJet. It's called the Hub. And WestJet's, this landing page is showing you some typical communication cards. These are news stories that end users can click on. And you'll notice there's things like likes and comments showing up on the cards. If I go into one of those news stories and we just sort of sneak down the page just a tiny bit, you'll notice on the left-hand side there, it says, join the conversation in Yammer. So in this particular situation, we knew that WestJet had a really active social network already in Yammer, and they didn't want to lose that great engagement that they already had in that social network. So what we did here is we built a connection so that these two systems would talk to each other. And so for every news page that a communicator wants to add it to, they can connect it to a Yammer conversation. And then vice versa, when a user's in Yammer, they can also link back to the news page and get the more details of the content. As we scroll on down the page here, you'll notice at the bottom, those comments that are sitting in Yammer can also surface right within the page, and I can like right from within the page. So thinking about the interactions and making that easier for end users is an important part of doing this kind of integration. So another kind of integration we see with social channels, this is the GTAA portal. This is the Greater Toronto Airport Authority portal. They run the Toronto Airport. And so quite a lot of information. That the Toronto Airport is such a big airport that they kind of run like a little city within the city. So they have their own police and fire department. And inside of their internet, very simple way of integrating their social feeds. If we scroll on down the page here, they pull out comments from Yammer that have been tagged with a special hashtag. And so there's another client that we see doing that, and I thought it's kind of a neat example. They're not pulling it out from Yammer, but they're using Workplace by Facebook. And so this is one place. It's Flight Center's intranet. And so if we scroll down from Flight Center's intranet, you'll notice that somewhere down in the middle of the page here, we have this news feed rolling up. And it says that it's showing all the feeds that have been tagged with Workplace feed, as well as the groups that I'm following. So in the preferences for this particular feed, end users can actually choose, which of the groups they want to roll up on this homepage. So they have, again, that one-stop shop and be able to see news and information and announcements that are being promoted through Yammer, but through their homepage of their intranet. Just like the WestJet example, and very similarly, on their news pages, if we scroll down, we can see this idea of posting to Workplace. So this is actually what a communicator would see if they were trying to connect this particular news item to a conversation in Workplace by Facebook. If they click on that link, they can choose which group they want that to go to. So if they had a specific group that was where there was an already active conversation, and then in Workplace, it shows up as a post with a link back to the news article, and all of that conversation happens both places. So again, great way to think about integrating those different channels so that end users don't not really have to think about, do I go here or do I go there? But there's a more full and thoughtful experience around collaboration and community building in the organization. Another experience that we think is really worth spending some time thinking about is helping people manage all of the alerts and the notifications that we get. One of the things that we know talking to organizations, and especially end users, is that they're getting notification fatigue. It's coming in from all of their systems, from ServiceNow and Teams and Yammer and perhaps some workflow tools. And so one way to solve this problem is thinking about using something like notification hubs. So Notification Hub is really just a landing page. In some organizations, they call it a dashboard, where someone can kind of get that quick view of all the things they need to pay attention to. So this is an example of one of the dashboards that we created for Goldcorp for their intranet Conveyor. Goldcorp is now Newmont Goldcorp. And Conveyor, this particular page was actually one of about a year later, they sort of surveyed and asked people what their favorite features were on the internet. And this became one of the favorite features for people because it did give them that kind of one-stop shop to take a look at all the things that they needed to get to. And of course, all these notifications were also built with links so that you can go and get to the lists and the alerts and actually action on some of the stuff that you're being notified. The other kind of way that we see this showing up, this is an example of another dashboard, is by integrating a couple things that you're seeing here. One is line of business systems. So on the left-hand side over there, you see this thing called service requests. So what that's doing is actually pulling out service requests that sit inside ServiceNow and just bringing a dashboard view of those so that the end user knows whether or not they need to go into ServiceNow to action on those. And on the right-hand side, you see these sort of action cards. So submit your time, submit your expenses. This is one way we're seeing enterprises make it easier for end users to go and action those other line of business systems and work right from within their intranet on those other line of business systems. So those are some common trends, but we're also starting to see some upcoming trends. I wouldn't go as far as to call them trends yet, but they're patterns that we're seeing emerge. And I thought we'd talk you through some of those because they're pretty exciting. And I think these kind of experience trends are going to make it, again, easier for end users to manage this world of information and lots of content and different line of business systems. The first one is this idea of like meta integration. So I showed you, for example, how there's organizations that are connecting communications to social content. We see the future of that happening even more. So this is an example of where an end user is looking at a dashboard of all of the different content sources that contain information that might be relevant for them. So everything from their enterprise social network to Twitter to the enterprise communications hub. And so these are presented in a card view. So Microsoft in its Fluent design framework has created a method for organizations to use and leverage content that sits within these line of business systems and then surface those as cards. And we think you're going to start to see these cards and tools to organize the way content flows a lot more in the future kind of digital workplace systems. Another pattern we're seeing, again, pretty new, is this idea of enterprise design systems. Lots of our customers start off with something really simple here, but we're seeing these enterprise design systems get more and more complex. So again, going back to the problem statement, if we have all these line of business systems, perhaps users should go to all of these systems because they're all sort of fit for purpose, and that makes sense for them to continue to use all of these systems as opposed to integrating them. That's where sort of an enterprise design system comes into play. And the goal of an enterprise design system is to make it easier for end users or users to move between these systems and have something be expected. Makes it a lot easier for them to interact with the systems when all of the systems look and feel and have the same patterns built into them. So what is an enterprise design system? It's a documented and agreed upon series of design patterns, interaction patterns. So for example, an interaction pattern might be how you represent or how you deal with motion or flow, or a design pattern might be how you represent data or information. Shared workflows and notification patterns, so creating a standardization around how users get notified and whether or not they can, for example, dismiss those notifications or if they're permanent. Integration patterns are how two line of business systems will look and consume each other's information. Search and knowledge patterns speaks to what are the search experiences and how can you consistently make search show up similarly between these different line of business systems, again, to make it easier for users. And then they often contain just things that you would see in a sort of enterprise branding toolkit, such as colors and fonts and tone and branding guidelines. One enterprise design system that I really like, it's something that's publicly available and you can Google it, is the GE Design's Predix design system. So their design system actually is quite respected for its thoughtfulness around all the different scenarios and pieces of the puzzle, if you will, that it contains. So they created the design system because they have so many different enterprises creating products that they wanted to start making these products look and feel more consistently to customers who are purchasing more than one from GE. And so this design system is a tool that the developers and designers all use in order to create a great user experience in a GE product. But it's a really neat system. You can jump around and take a look at some of the tools they have there. So for example, they even have patterns and practices for if one of their pieces of machinery is going to be used in low light versus highlight. So a lot of their systems are used in very dark rooms. So they have different design patterns for those workplace scenarios. So it's just kind of a neat set of tools built into this design system that I think are fun to explore. But I believe, lots of organizations should be starting to think about building their own design systems to piece together these enterprise tools. The next pattern that we're seeing is this idea of beyond the browser. I think actually Teams is probably the biggest disruptor here. Since it's come out, it's really become a sort of standard place that people go to get their work done, and it's really starting to replace the browser as the number one stop for end users. So I think, this is Microsoft's claim that it's the place where people go and get work done. And what we'll see in the future is a lot more integration with other content coming from other sources in the Microsoft Teams environment. So what you're looking at here is an intranet and some corporate content surfaced through a tab inside of one of the teams that I have access to in Microsoft Teams. So this reuse of content and this replacement of a traditional browser as a way of consuming information is certainly going to be a pattern that you're going to see more in the future. Lastly, I think, is this idea of knowledge management patterns. Knowledge management has been a term that's been thrown around for so many years. We've been dying, I think, as practitioners to see this problem solved well. And so I thought I'd just talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's current and what's on the horizon around knowledge management and building great experiences for employees around that. So one of the common things we see for organizations, and people are doing this now, is creating little hubs for knowledge and tools. So in what you're looking at here is we have content being served out of SharePoint. We have an integrated search. So you'll notice halfway down the page, it's search, knowledge, and tools. So that's a specific search that's only looking at a subset of content. And then below that, you see different facets of organizing or navigating the information. It's both by topic and by type. So these are really common ways of organizing knowledge and tools. Let's go one level deeper. You're looking at the kind of same scenario here. This is a policies and procedure section for that PHSA, the organization we talked about earlier. One of the things they have is this idea of searching by my organizational type. So the part of the organization that I sit in. This became actually so important that sort of midway through their intranet journey, so about a year after they launched, they actually started defaulting someone's agency. So it doesn't default to across all of PHSA, but it actually defaults to the specific agency the person sits in. So they're using those same preferences that users set for their news and other content to help target policy and procedure information to the right end users. That's what's there now. What we're seeing in the future, Microsoft has launched a series of search improvements. Some of these are still rolling out, but we'll continue to see these pushed. So inside of the Office 365 environment on all modern sites, you now see this search bar. And that search bar is pan-organizational. It looks across all of the sites within a collection. And it can pull up news and files and other sites that match the search patterns. So it's just doing a lot more sort of facet matching right out of the gate. And it also comes with the capability of extending it and bringing in other content sources. So there are a few search connectors that Microsoft's launched. So they have search connectors for file shares, ServiceNow, MediaWiki, Azure Lake Storage. So if you're using the cloud to store blob content, you can connect to that information and have it surface in SharePoint search. And then there's hundreds of other partner connectors that are out there. So this idea of connecting people and making these systems work together through search is going to be something we'll continue to see increasing. And then lastly, on the knowledge management front is what Microsoft's come out with their Project Cortex. So this is Microsoft's new set of technologies for knowledge management. I think they're really quite innovative. They sort of straddle everything from wiki group collaboration and gamification of knowledge, as well as artificial intelligence, all sort of pieced together to create a cool set of knowledge management tools. So this environment, just to give you a sense of how this is going to work, you're looking at an email and an inbox. And the artificial intelligence built into Cortex has gone out and it's looked for a pattern matching, and it's found that there's a word that's used inside this email called core, and core actually relates to a line of business enterprise set of content. So what you're looking at is a card that represents a sort of very brief description of the project and people that are associated with it. But behind the scenes, Project Cortex contains a large knowledge center that's pulling together all of this content, partially by going out and analyzing what it thinks is the right answer and providing that as a potential draft, and then using end users that are related to that content to validate whether or not it is indeed the right content. And then further than that, There's a whole knowledge reporting center where you can see the trending topics, contributions. There's like I said, there's gamification built in, so you can kind of see how your content's being used and sort of be encouraged to continue to contribute content inside of this knowledge center. So these all represent completely different ways and patterns of thinking about the employee experience around knowledge management. And so these, I think in the next couple of years will be pretty significant for organizations that are struggling or trying to wrap their heads around, what's the future of knowledge management look like. So kind of to wrap up about all these experience trends, certainly we didn't cover every possible experience that you could have in Office 365, but we thought we'd just provide you a little bit of like how would you go about thinking about these patterns and practices in your organization and create the right employee experience for your employees. And when you think about an experience, it's kind of combining three different parts. One is the intellectual part, the one that's like cognitive, the emotional part, so it has to resonate and feel right for end users, and this instinctual reptilian brain, which is the first one to kick in when users are having an experience. And an employee experience is a relatively new domain, so we're really bringing a new tool set to what are old problems. And those tool sets are things like journey maps, where you can take a draft out through the life cycle what an employee journey looks like. So this is an example of an employee journey specifically around the performance management relationship. It happens to be one that we used internally here at Habanero. You can go low fidelity on these things. This was a client scenario where we asked people to map the journey they had around looking for enterprise content. So in this case, this user was looking for a document, and this is the different steps that they took in terms of trying to get to that document. You can notice in the very last frame there, they're sad and desperate. So this was not a great experience for this particular client. Another way you can create great experiences, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but experiences certainly aren't limited to user experiences or the sort of interfaces that people have. They can actually also be the sort of cultural interactions. Like, how do you provide a space for psychological safety for people? How do you ensure that people are wired for transparency or sharing? So those are also part of the experience journey, and they're the kinds of things when you're doing experience mapping that you would be thinking about. So this tool, like a collaboration lab, is one way to observe people in their setting. Maybe you're planning a United Way campaign, or you're trying to do some cross-regional sales, or you have an executive offsite. In a collaboration lab, what you would do is set up a workshop to help people get used to the technology. You would set them next to an observer to actually watch how they're collaborating in this scenario. And then you pull out those insights in a workshop. And from that, you create training and support materials, or you design the tools and configure them to sort of hit some of the things and themes that you heard in your organization. So if you're interested in moving forward and thinking about, what the employee experience could look like for your organization around this digital workplace or the Office 365 toolkit, here's just some of the things you could do. Certainly starting with what you know and looking at the data and kind of understanding what's working and not working for people by listening into the data that you have, or observing them and how they're working, doing things like interviews, but also observational interviews and observational labs to just get a sense of what is happening out there. Building out archetypes, one size doesn't fit all, and there may be parts of your organization that need to work dramatically different than others, so such as people on the road or people that have to access information through mobile devices. So understanding those archetypes is a really important step of defining the right journey. And then you can also do lots of journey mapping. So building the kinds of journey maps we showed you here, sometimes we get hands-on and we start to prototype the tools out or use a live environment to actually craft something on the fly, and then using a sprint to kind of validate that with users. So there's lots of options here into what you could do with Habanero. So that is it. I would like to thank everyone for their time today in the presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is bedwards@habaneroconsulting.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or help you out in your journey.